Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Steve Borthwick has updated his England squad as they continue preparations for the World Cup in France later this year. The latest squad now includes players from Northampton Saints and Leicester Tigers, and there's some interesting selections in there, in particular at scrum half, so I'm going to be getting into that. Drop a comment down below on who you think should be the scrum half options for England and any other points you want to make about this squad. It's starting to rev up. We're starting to get closer to those warm-up games in August as well. So lots to get into. Drop a comment down below and like the video, subscribe to the channel. But let's get into it. So the build up to this World Cup in terms of the England squad feels a little bit strange for me. This is essentially the second of three England squads. We had the original one. This one now includes players from Northampton and Leicester, who were the losing semi-finalists in the Premiership, so they've had their rest weeks, and then we'll have a kind of third and final squad once those Saracens and Sale players are available. So it's a little bit strange. It's kind of hard to keep up with, but that's where we are. The headlines from the latest group of players to join from Steve Borthwick's point of view is that Ben Youngs, Jack Van Poortvliet and Alex Mitchell all come into the squad. Plenty of scrum halves there. What that means is Ben Spencer and Harry Randall drop out. Quite contentious. I would imagine a lot of you won't be too happy with that. I'll touch on it more in just a moment. And also Ollie Hassell-Collins has dropped out of the squad as well. Feel sorry for Hassell-Collins. He started against Scotland at the beginning of the Six Nations and then picked up an injury, dropped out the squad, and you thought maybe we'll get a run of it to prove himself ahead of this World Cup, but it doesn't appear to be that way. Now, injuries will always come into it. We might see him come back into that squad, but for the time being, he has dropped out. So a full list of those players that have been included. First of all, the Leicester contingent. Obviously, I mentioned Ben Youngs and Jack Van Poortvliet, and then you've got Dan Cole, Joe Hayes, George Martin, Guy Porter, Freddie Stewart, and Anthony Watson. And Ollie Chessum is a part of the squad, but he's alongside Luke Cowan-Dickie and Bully Vulapola, the players continuing their rehab, so they're not in full training at the moment. Then the Northampton Saints players, I mentioned Mitchell, then Courtney Laws, Lewis Ludlam, Dave Ribbons, Fraser Dingwall, Tommy Freeman, and Finn Smith. So a lot of players coming into the squad. The squad's now up to 38, and that's not involving those players that are going through rehab, and we still have the Sale and Saracens players to be included. I'm sure most of you are aware already. The reason that it is staggered is because there's a certain amount of rest weeks, 5 weeks rest essentially between the end of the domestic season and when they're then able to link up with England. So that's why Leicester and Northampton players are now in, and in a week's time we'll have a better idea of what Steve Borthwick is thinking in terms of Sale and Saracens. And I think what's going to be fascinating from the Saracens and Sale perspective is the scrum half. What's going to happen at scrum half at the moment? Because as I say, 3 more options have come in. Danny Kerr is still in there. Harry Randall and Ben Spencer have dropped out. But what does Steve Borthwick do with the options from Sale? Because Rafi Quirk is a guy I think a lot of people would like to see in that squad. And Gus Waugh has been the scrum half who has been one of the form scrum halves in the Premiership this season. He's been starting instead of Quirk because he was out injured a lot. So what he does at scrum half I think is really interesting. But in terms of where we are at the moment, I imagine that we're all pretty in agreement really that we can't quite understand why Ben Spencer misses out and you have Ben Youngs and Jack Van Poortvliet coming in. Because Ben Youngs, as brilliant a career as he has had, is, I just think, so slow. I think England's ball is so much slower when Ben Youngs is on the pitch. It was why Alex Mitchell coming off the bench. I know Ben Youngs didn't play a lot in the Six Nations either. It was more Jack Van Poortvliet. But when Mitchell came off the bench in the Six Nations, there was a lot more zip into the game immediately from an England point of view. So it's kind of frustrating at the moment of why Ben Youngs is there. Now, I guess the argument is you've got Ben Youngs and Danny Kerr there, the more experienced heads for Jack Van Poortvliet, and Alex Mitchell, who don't have quite as much international experience to help guide them through. But for someone like Ben Spencer, you just feel for him, really. I think over the last few years, he has played very, very well in the Premiership. And actually, I think he can suit England's game plan, because there is an argument that you could put forward in that as much as we might like England to play a quicker, more attacking style of play, they're probably going to continue the way we know that Borthwick likes playing, which is a lot of box kicking, it's tactical, it's territorial. So Ben Youngs and Jack Van Poortvliet will execute that. To be fair, maybe Harry Randall isn't the best scrum half to implement that. So him dropping out the squad, even though plenty of people would like to see him still in there, maybe him dropping out isn't such a shock. But then when it comes to Ben Spencer, you look at it and I think he can play that way. He can box kick. He can be very tactical. He can try and control the game. I think that a lot of times, actually, that's the way that Bath have played and have tried to implement that sort of style. So that, for me, is where it doesn't quite make sense at the moment, why there is a frustration. Is Ben Youngs going to go to the World Cup? I wondered after the Six Nations if he was starting to be phased out and whether we might have seen Mitchell starting and then Jack Van Poortvliet and a Rafi Quirk or a Randall, or maybe even a Danny Kerr for experience. So I'm just not too sure what's going to happen at the moment at scrum half, but I do expect, I think Jack Van Poortvliet will be there. Surely Mitchell's got to be there. I mean, I think Mitchell should be the starting 9. Then is it going to be Youngs or Danny Kerr? Will it be a Rafi Quirk? I'd go for Rafi Quirk because I think he is absolutely box office. I think he's brilliant. He has so much potential. But yeah, for me at this moment in time, I think the scrum half position for England is shaping up really, really interestingly. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. From the smattering of responses I've seen so far, it seems like most people aren't too happy with Ben Youngs being there. A few other bits, though, just to mention before I finish the video. No Dan Kelly, I've seen quite a few people point that out, who seemed like he was going to be the guy at the start of the Six Nations, picked up an injury, missed out on the tournament, and he now isn't part of that squad either, which is particularly interesting with the news that Ollie Lawrence has picked up an injury in England camp. Now, we don't know how serious it is at the moment. It's clearly not so bad that it needs to rule him out of the tournament, but considering how good he was in the Six Nations, that I think England started to have a better idea of what that midfield partnership could look like with Lawrence there, that's potentially quite a big call. So no Dan Kelly there. We'll see how Ollie Lawrence goes. I mean, it's such a long time still until the World Cup. They've still got months to recover. I would imagine he is going to be fine, but that is maybe just one element of this just to keep a little eye on, to see exactly what England do there, what the centres are going to be looking like. And I mentioned it already, Ollie Chesham is also in rehab as well. We'll wait to see what happens with Sale and Saracens. There will be plenty of those Saracens coming in. Quite a few Sale as well, but not quite as many, I would imagine. Rafi Quirk, Gus Waugh, Joe Carpenter as an outside shout, obviously Tom Curry. So still plenty of way to go, but this England squad in terms of the wider training squad is starting to take shape. I also saw it, I think it was on the BBC, I saw that England's first warm-up game for the World Cup is the 5th of August, and they will name their squad for the World Cup on the 7th of August, which on the one hand seemed a little bit strange to me. I need to double check if that is true. I'm sure I read it somewhere, but it seems odd to only play one of your 4 warm-ups, then have your squad for the World Cup. But then also you're about a month out from the start of the World Cup, so having those group of guys who can play together in those 3 other World Cup warm-ups, maybe actually it does make sense and it's less of a story. At first I thought it was a little bit strange, but maybe I've probably talked myself around a little bit that it does make sense. So drop comments down below. Let me know what you think of this. I think the scrum half debate is the most interesting thing here. Few of you might have a word to say about Ollie Hassell-Collins as well, and disappointment for him dropping out so early in the process. So drop a comment down below. I look forward to reading them. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. And I'll see you in the next one.